Just as a warning, this analysis contains references to suicide. I'm not going to beat around the bush. We might have just gotten the best character moment in all of Blue Lock. Or I'm just a bit biased as a massive Barou fan. But either way, Barou's awakening in the past few chapters is a stunningly beautiful display of his growth over the course of the story. And there's a lot more to it than you have probably thought. Hello, my name is Sean, and I've been positively feasting these past few weeks. Most of the major Blue Lock characters have an ongoing character conflict, a dilemma that they're forced into time and again. Isagi is learning how and when to assert his ego. Nagi's arc is about when to open himself up to new experiences. And Bachira has to navigate between standing out and fitting in. If you're interested in that last part, by the way, I recently did a full character analysis on Bachira that I'm really proud of. So do check that out as well once you're finished with this video. In any case, what's important about all of these conflicts is that they don't just offer our cast opportunities to grow, but also provide insight on Blue Lock's views of what makes a world-class striker. And this is especially true in the case of Shouei Barou. Barou's personal conflict is the dilemma between staying true to his lofty ideals and making compromises to become a more successful player. This is most prominently illustrated by his breakthrough in the second selection, where Barou found a way to create chemical reactions with his teammates without becoming a supporting actor in the process. So now we've entered the Neo-Egoist League, and Barou faces a very similar dilemma to that of the second selection. He's offered the position of Juventus' star striker on a silver platter, but only if he will accept Snuffy's philosophy of treating football as a job. In other words, he's all but guaranteed a successful football career. All he has to do is cast aside his thorny path of kingship. But here's the issue. The entire reason why Barou was able to become such an overwhelming player is that he holds himself to a higher standard than anyone else. He truly lives and breathes his convictions like no one else in the series. So if Barou were to compromise on his beliefs, he'd forsake everything that gave meaning to his life so far. But that's not the only challenge Snuffy presents to Barou. In addition to the choice between accepting a new philosophy and staying true to your ideals, Snuffy places another, closely related conundrum before him. Is it more important to strive for a potentially unattainable standard, or to love yourself and build a sustainable football career? To me, Chapter 215 contains the bravest, most hard-hitting dialogue in all of Blue Lock. There's something just incredibly real about the page where Snuffy talks about his best friend Mick's suicide. You can see just from the look in Barou's eyes that this hits really close to home. And what makes all this so powerful is that Barou's reaction is completely justified by everything we've learned about him so far. After all, we've seen the moment where Barou himself succumbed to despair and lost his entire self-worth. Yes, I agree that "I'm not a king after all" is prime meme material. I actually love the corniness of a guy imagining himself as a broken man, an alcoholic living alone in a tiny studio, just really sad, just because he was made to pass the ball one single time. But now, the manga uses this larger-than-life figure to ask real questions about mental health in a way that shonen manga and media catered towards men more generally rarely dare to do. And in my view, that's fucking beautiful. Here's the thing. This entire dilemma rests on one simple assumption. Namely, that Barou is similar to Snuffy's younger self and therefore at risk of making the exact same mistakes as his coach. For Snuffy, Barou's rejection of his philosophy is a sign that he's still an arrogant kid who has always gotten by on his talents alone, in contrast to himself, the world-wizened adult. Barou, however, strongly refutes this very assumption. So, to be honest, when these chapters first dropped, I believed that Barou's look at the moment of truth said more than 1,000 words, and that this was just him defending his damaged pride. But now that I've pondered this moment a bit more, I think that Barou is actually right. To understand why, I need to go back to the second selection one more time. The manga places two crucial scenes with Jinpachi Ego right before and right after the match where Isagi humiliates Barou. First, we've got chapter 56, which is titled Proof That I've Wagered My Life. The main portion of this chapter is focused on Barou's interactions with Isagi and Nagi now that they've become teammates. This is where we first learn about Barou's meticulous lifestyle and come to understand that his exceptional football abilities arose from his uncompromising mindset. In other words, Barou has wagered every fiber of his being to the pursuit of excellence, and his overwhelming skills on the playing field are the living proof of his determination. The proof that he's wagered his life, if you will. But then, the chapter segues into a scene where Jinpachi Ego discusses the issue of talent. For Ego, talent is not the same thing as one's natural abilities. Rather, it's the power to put your true abilities on display. In other words, raw skill is nice, but it's not talent if you can't bring out its full potential. All of this, of course, is highly relevant to the Barou situation. Here, we've got a player with raw potential coming out of his ears, but he's squandering his talents with his uncompromising attitude. But as it turns out, Barou can change. When Isagi shattered everything Barou believed himself to be, he adapted and came out stronger. Finally, his talent has come to fruition. And this prompts Ego's next reflection about the importance of learning from defeat. For Ego, there are too many players out there who simply look the other way when they suffer a loss. In his view, this is a massive problem. After all, the only ones who can make their dreams come true are those who surpass their limits in the face of despair. And it's exactly this distinction that determines the winners of the previous match. Barou experienced the despair of defeat, but came out stronger than ever, whereas Reo got left behind by Nagi and only wallowed in self-pity in the aftermath. So, with all this in mind, let's return to the original question. Does the current Barou actually resemble Snuffy and his friends? Back then, the two friends were indeed coasting on their raw abilities alone. In that sense, they were like Barou, but the Barou before he got humbled in the second selection. But by this point, Barou has long moved past that stage. He's far beyond cruising by on his talents alone. And more than that, the circumstances behind Snuffy's fall from grace couldn't be less applicable to Barou. Snuffy and Mick became complacent and got involved with scandals. And something like that just seems highly unlikely for Barou, the man who upholds the most rigorous routine of all the Blue Lock players. The interaction between Barou and Lorenzo is also really telling on this front. So first, we get to see Barou engaging in after-training stretches and meditation. And right then, Snuffy's protege comes barging in and invites Barou to watch a film instead. With this scene, Blue Lock establishes a telling contrast between the two players. Barou is austere and disciplined. Lorenzo, indulgent and wasteful. Snuffy has handed him a life of material prosperity, and Lorenzo enjoys it to the fullest. In other words, what we're being shown here is that the one who's more likely to succumb to the luxuries of stardom is not Barou, but Lorenzo. Ironically, Snuffy is raising his disciples to make the exact same mistakes as his younger self. In any case, the point is that Snuffy was fundamentally wrong in his assessment of Barou. He may have seen some of his younger self inside of his new star striker, but nevertheless, he severely underestimated Barou's maturity. And with the recent chapters, it finally became clear why he did that. All this time, the story of Barou and Snuffy has been building up to a brilliant twist, that the one to grow and change in this match is not Barou, but Snuffy. The manga has carefully set up a contrast between the two of them in how they deal with loss. Barou experienced the depths of despair and grew stronger from the experience, whereas Snuffy lost his best friends and has been a shadow of his former self ever since. This comes out best in that wonderful panel of Snuffy and Mick looking back to their glory days when they're driving off to unknown horizons. They're so sure that a bright future awaits them. They'll be the kings of the world, and they'll never become boring adults who tell anyone to abandon their dreams. Right here, we witness just how much of a broken man Snuffy has truly become since that point. After all, the very first thing Snuffy tells his Blue Lock players is that they should stop playing football to make their dreams come true. Snuffy has changed into the kind of boring adult that he used to despise. One who's more concerned with paying the bills than becoming king of the world. And most damning of all, he's no longer playing football for his own sake either. Rather, Snuffy's achievements serve as a form of atonement. He just needs to fulfill his promise to Mick, and then he'll retire. In fact, Snuffy is doing the very thing that Ego disparaged in the second selection. He never came to terms with his loss, and he's therefore condemned to chasing after the mere ghost of a dream. And more than that, Snuffy created an environment that protects his players from succumbing to despair like he did. Snuffy tries to stomp their dreams out of them so that they can't experience disappointment if they fail to attain them. And he preemptively takes responsibility for their failings. But here's the thing. In the world of Blue Lock, you can only achieve unprecedented growth by tasting defeat and seeing your dreams crumble away before your very eyes. So by shielding his players from despair, Snuffy is essentially stifling their football prospects in the process. So with all this, let's turn to King Barou's crowning moment. Barou's rejection of Snuffy and everything he stands for is essentially a testament to how much he has grown since his humiliation in the second selection. Barou sees Snuffy's practices for what they truly are. The coach is essentially coddling his players and denying them the taste of despair, which is a quintessential experience to becoming the world's best striker. That's the fundamental difference between these two men. Barou never lost sight of the road to the top, whereas Snuffy never came to terms with his loss, and as a result, he crafted the optimal team for middling players. And that's when something truly beautiful happens. By rejecting Snuffy's football philosophy, Barou effectively tears down the adult persona that Snuffy had created for himself and rekindles the fires of his coach's youth. All of this is underscored by the sustained contrast between adults and children throughout this match. When Barou figuratively hands in his letter of resignation, he signals that he's breaking free from the world of adults, the world where football has become a mere job. From this point, Barou refuses the advice of a sensible grown-up. If being an adult means losing sight of your dreams, Barou must act like a child to become the king of the football world. And with his childish rebellion, Barou reminded Snuffy of all his hopes and dreams that he'd lost along the way, and gets his coach to cast off his adult persona in the process. All this is reflected in Snuffy's final decision, where he emerges as a changed man. Snuffy supports Barou's goal by pushing Noah out of the way. On a figurative level, you could say that he's moving the boring adults out of the picture and making place for Barou to conquer the world. So during this match, Barou has given Snuffy a chance at redemption, an opportunity to move forward after his loss. And yet, I can't help but worry about the consequences of this for Barou. There's something really harrowing about the last panel of the flashback to Snuffy's glory days. We see Mick, eyes burning with youthful determination, proudly declaring that he'd rather be dead than fail to become the king of the football world. But Mick never realized his dream, and well, we know what happened next. He followed through on his determination. So in that light, it's really hard not to see a dark shadow looming over Barou. For one, Mick sounds suspiciously like Barou in his pursuit of kingship. And on the flip side, Barou too declares that he'd rather go out in a blaze of glory than live in a world where he can't become the number one. The very thing, of course, that happened to his predecessor. Furthermore, Barou thinks about what would happen if he lost the match in unsettling detail. In his view, he'd become the laughingstock of the entire world. His life would effectively fall to pieces. So in this match, Barou has resolved to stay true to his path until the bitter end, but that end might be sooner than we think. To be honest, I don't believe that there is a right choice to the Snuffy dilemma. Snuffy made Barou part of a world-class team and netted him a 100 million yen salary. This is not like the second selection, where Barou was at risk of fading into obscurity if he didn't follow his ego. In the Neo-Egoist League, Barou would be set for life if he'd follow Snuffy's path. And yet, that life would come at the expense of his dignity, of everything that gave him meaning and purpose. Something like this is a hallmark of truly phenomenal writing. I think that this match will go down as one of the rawest moments of the series, and I'm really curious to see how Barou will fare in the long term. One last thing. I've speculated in earlier videos that Bayern München might lose against Juventus for a variety of reasons. Now, in all honesty, I am less certain about this than it was like, 10-15 chapters ago, even if many of my arguments pretty much stand as they did. Yet, the recent chapters have also given me another reason why a potential Bayern loss would be really fitting on a thematic level. As we've seen, the stories of Barou and Snuffy revolve around the different ways that football players handle defeat and loss. Mick couldn't come to terms with his dream slipping out of his grasp. Snuffy experienced devastating losses, and as a result, he shielded his players from experiencing a similar pain. Barou, on the other hand, managed to drag himself back from his lowest point. And even in this match, he breathed new life into his team exactly because he was losing to Isagi. So in that light, this seems like the perfect moment to flip the script. After losing to a team that has learned how to grow stronger from defeat, the manga can examine how the Bayern players would handle a serious loss. So that's all from me, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on the recent chapters as well. And if you liked what you saw, consider subscribing for more in-depth Blue Lock analysis every other week. And if you want my thoughts on other series, keep an eye out on my second channel. Link is in the description below.